name is Judy Guerra, and I am the program manager for EFA Project Space. We'd like to welcome you all this evening for this reading as part of our current exhibition. And just a few things to get started here, a few housekeeping items. First of all, welcome. We're thrilled you're here. A Q&A will be held at the conclusion of the formal program, but feel free to utilize the chat to ask questions, make comments, give shout outs. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the course of the evening. Just to kind of reaffirm that EFA is an inclusive and affirming environment. Project Space is inherently anti-racist and anti-oppression in all forms, and no hate will be tolerated. Tonight's event will feature visual descriptions and closed captioning, and I guess along those lines, again, my name is Judy Guerra, my pronouns are she, her, and a visual description for those who aid from that. I am a early 30s transgender woman, white. My dark brown hair is pulled back into a tight bun, and I'm wearing a black acid dye crop top. And then we would like to do a land acknowledgement, which is to say that this is Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland, and gathering place for many indigenous nations and beings. When the unceded earth breathes again, there will be indigenous lives here, as there are now and have always been. It will be Lenape-Hoking. We learn from the bedrock and commit to uplifting, honoring, and listening to those who are seen and unseen, present and future. And again, you are at our reading tonight with Demian and Alán. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass it along to Dylan Gauthier, who is my colleague and the director of Project Space. So Dylan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Judy, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. As Judy said, yes, I'm Dylan Gauthier. I'm the director of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts Project Space. I use he, him pronouns. Short visual description, 40-year-old-ish white settler male with curly hair, usually wear glasses, but I've been Zooming all day and my eyes are killing me. I'm wearing a black button-up shirt over a t-shirt, which was printed by my friend Lena Hawkins. EFA Project Space is one of 3 programs of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. We're located generally in Midtown Manhattan on West 39th Street. And I'm honored to be with you tonight and grateful for your presence. Just to take a moment to thank the EFA staff and board, Executive Director Jane Stevenson, and my amazing colleague Judy Guerra, who we heard from earlier, our program manager. I also want to thank Project Space's Advisory Council and our funders who are listed here on the slide, and invite everyone to look into our programs and to think about supporting us in these unprecedented times. Small artist-run centers like EFA are all the more reliant on grants and on public individual supporters. Contributions enable us to do this work, so we thank you so much for your support. Judy, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So it is my absolute privilege to introduce our current exhibition, Speculations on the Infrared, curated by Christopher Green, featuring work by Demian, DinéYazhi, Nicholas Galanin, Kite and Devin Ronenberg, Alan Michelson, New Red Order, Unicorn Riot, and Lyle Wilson. Before I do that, I just want to thank especially Demian and Alán for joining us tonight to read and share their work. Also express my gratitude to Chris for all of his work in organizing this exhibition, and for all of the artists who have allowed us to share and show their work with the world in person at Project Space and virtually over this month. And also to just say thank you so much to apexart, to Betsy, Hawley, and Abby Habeen for linking up with us over Damian's work, which features in the exhibition that Betsy curated at apexart right now, Native Feminisms, and Abby is going to tell us about that exhibition in just a moment. Just to start off, I'm going to give a very quick overview of Speculations on the Infrared. So this show is curated by Chris Green. We're looking at a view of Project Space's gallery on West 39th Street. The work that you see here is by Lyle Wilson on the left. There's a monitor with a video piece by Unicorn Riot, and then a series of large-scale photographs and a sound installation by Nicholas Galanin. Speculations on the Infrared explores tactics of speculative indigenous futurism that foreground and redeploy the subsumed and repressive nature of the settler state's relationship to colonized peoples as itself a potential tool for sovereignty. Considering infra as below, as in the spectrum below visible light, but also that which is further on. The works in this exhibition speculate on the latent desires for indigeneity and the subaltern indigenous DNA of the settler national identity and mythos. Considering how such undercurrents might be aestheticized while viewing celebrations of visibility and inclusion with skepticism, the contributors imagine how sovereign structures, relations, and visions might be erected upon the rubble of what is, from an indigenous perspective, already a post-apocalyptic colonial landscape. I am reading here from the curator's text, so thank you again, Chris Green, for this handy intro to your show. And Judy, if we can show the next images. So these are works by Demian, DinéYazhi in the show, including this piece, which was a installation of reflective vinyl on a matte black wall. And there's a long poem on that wall. Actually, go back for 1 second just to do a visual description of the image. And it's radiating a kind of rainbow color. And you can read in that, even when we raid and subvert the fuck out of these spaces, remember the technologies of survival that your ancestors passed on to your sacred body, just to give a taste. And the second piece, if you go ahead 1 slide, thanks, Judy, is a banner that will be installed at West 39th Street, and we're planning that this will happen during the duration of the show. It's been delayed because of the recent weather, but this is a new piece, a commission by Demian called In a Dream. In a Dream, you saw a way to decolonize and you were full of joy. This is a banner on a scaffolding at West 39th Street, which hangs above the entrance to the Elizabeth Foundation Center. So before we begin, I also want to just signal an upcoming series of virtual conversations with correspondents across the continent, which begins on February 23rd with a lunchtime or afternoon reading with Anne Spice, who is the Assistant Professor of Geography and Environmental Studies at Ryerson University in Toronto, Treaty 13 territory, followed the following week by a talk with Lou Cornum and a guest. We're also hosting a forthcoming workshop and public program with UPIC choreographer Emily Johnson, who I think is here on the call tonight. So hello, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Emily's currently based in New York, Lenapehoking, and we'll also be releasing a catalog at the close of the exhibition on March 6th, which will be available online. So please do come to our website. You can also check out projectspace-efanyc.org or efaproject.space for more information about speculations and parallel programs that are happening at the same time. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I will pass the mic now to Abby from Apex.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's really a joy to celebrate both exhibitions tonight with this special reading event. I'm Abby Hebine, she, her. I'm the Director of Programs at Apex Art. For a visual description, I'm an early 30s white woman with long brown hair, sitting with a mirror and a wood door behind me. And Apex Art is a nonprofit arts organization. We're based in Lower Manhattan, and thank you, Judy, for the land acknowledgement earlier. We have exhibitions and public programs that take place around the world as well, and this is really due to our open call process. So twice a year, we invite people, anyone who has an idea for an exhibition, to submit a proposal to us, and all these ideas are then read and voted on by over 400 people around the world. And the top 4 ideas become a part of our Apex Art exhibition series. Our international open call is happening now through March 1st. So we really encourage you to apply. If you're sitting thinking and you have an exhibition idea, we really welcome all ideas from everywhere. All we require is a proposal in 500 words or less for a group exhibition. We do not accept images, CVs, or a resume. It's all so that the idea is what is considered. And this process tells us what matters to people around the world and gives us insight into the ideas that are most urgent to bring to form for a global audience. And I highlight this program, 1, because it's happening now, and 2, because it's how Native Feminisms came to us. It was selected through last year's open call, and we have had the delight of working with Elizabeth Hawley, who we know as Betsy, who is the curator of Native Feminisms. And I know Betsy is here today, so hello and thank you. I'm gonna take you through kind of a speed tour through the exhibition now. So in the next slide, we'll start at the entrance of the exhibition, where visitors are met with posters produced by Demian and DinéYazhi, who are excited to be here with tonight, and the collective Rise. The posters really establish the premise of the show. So the titles each underscore the significance of Indigenous feminism, insist that we decolonize feminism, and remind us that Native communities have long practiced a form of proto-feminism or no-wave feminism. And for the visual description, we're looking at kind of the corner entrance of apexart. So two white walls and 4 posters kind of in a grid in front of us. So the next slide, another Rise poster titled Decolonize Your Love on the top here reminds us that many Indigenous communities in the Americas allowed and celebrated gender fluidity prior to European invasion. Expressions of gender fluidity are also taken up by Sheldon Raymore and DinéYazhi's experiences with discrimination linked to gender bias are further explored in Marcella Ernest's Because of Who I Am film. In the next slide, we see, this is, I guess, the visual description. We'll see an installation view with works hung on the wall, as well as a low kind of ankle level plinth with soft sculptures. In the left corner, there's a vitrine and other kind of sculptural pieces hung on the wall. And the exhibition displays works that show Indigenous women's significant roles in their communities as caretakers, leaders, mothers, and artists, as well as protectors, athletes, and femme warriors. The works of Diani Whitehawk and Maria Hupfield here watch over Natani Nota's soft sculptures, whose forms evoke a vulnerable population known as missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2 spirits. In the next slide, Nota's works connect violence against women to violence done on Earth, an entity characterized as feminine in many Indigenous worldviews. And eco-criticism is a key to Native feminisms and is also taken up by Elizabeth López in her prints, which visualize spiritual ancestors, our grandmothers here, bringing work back to Earth to ensure her healing and survival. Indigenous futures are inextricably linked with past and present and cyclical time. And this connection to Indigenous futurism particularly links our exhibitions, Native Feminisms and Speculations on the Infrared, which was again, one of the many reasons that really brought us here tonight to co-host the event. So I'll conclude there really with an invitation to explore and visit us. We're open Thursdays through Saturdays. And that is all for me for now. Dylan, I'll pass the screen back on to you.
Thank you so much, Abby. So for anyone joining us who doesn't already have access, I just want to mention that there are bios for both Demian and Alán on EFA Project Space's website, and I will put a link to that event so you can look those up, and we will get right into the reading. So our first reader is going to be Demian. So thank you so much. Again, everybody for joining us, and thank you, Demian and Alán. Excited and looking forward to hearing from you tonight.
Yat my name is Demian DinéYazhi. I'm born to the clans Nastache, Tabahe, and Totachitni of the Diné tribe. Just for a visual description, I am a non-binary, Indigenous, queer 37-year-old sitting in my living room in Portland, Oregon, wearing a gray long sleeve shirt with some silver dangly earrings. Behind me are some plants and a bunch of books and zines that I've collected over the years. Alán's book is in there as well. I wanted to start off the reading by reading and sharing a poem by a local Portland poet, Manuel Arturo Abreu, from their book Transtrender. They are an amazing poet, so you should support them as well. This, but you know what? Actually, before I start, I want to thank Elizabeth and Chris for showing the work, for doing the work and holding space for Indigenous voices. As well as for the folks at Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts and Apex Art Gallery, who I had actually applied to. I had submitted a proposal like a couple of years ago to curate a show that was focused on supporting and amplifying Indigenous, queer, trans, and femme voices. So anyway, I think it's important as well. And maybe I'll just say this real quickly. I think it's important for, in case other institutions and other spaces are listening and tuned in. This is something that I've tried to make like a essential point to my practice going forward, is saying that, like, I think it's very important that more Indigenous people are part of the process. More Indigenous curators, you know, obviously need to be,
for real,
need to have jobs. More Indigenous people need to be on the boards of these spaces as well. And also more Indigenous people need to be in the panel selection committee. You know, I've had the privilege to have access and to also, you know, be included as a juror for some of these things. And I've realized that through this whole process, you know, I've just seen a complete lack of Indigenous artists who are interested in this. Having Indigenous people on the board, having them, you know, sitting in the whole jury process, having them just as a point of contact, like not only as a point of contact, but having them in positions of power, like get us into the room, allow us to drive these conversations and allow us to really do the work that we need to do in order to decolonize these institutions, in order for us to get into these institutions and give that land back to Indigenous, Black and Brown communities. And I think that's something that, you know, that's a conversation that really lacked this year. And that's something that we need to be having as artists, writers, subversive, you know, decolonial allies. So anyway, I say all that because I think it's important to my work, and I'm trying to figure out how I navigate spaces going forward. But I want to thank you all for allowing me and inviting me to say these things and to share my work. And I particularly want to thank Alán for their work and support and everything that they do. They are doing some really amazing work. And it's been such a pleasure to form more of a friendship through a shared art practice these last few years. Now on to Manuel. This poem is titled Untitled parentheses gesture, end parentheses. Self-loathing is called feeling male. My younger sister always felt like my older sister. Apologies are about social control. I apologize to my mom for DJing devil music. This tattoo says I've been outside myself for so long. I'm not allowed back in. This feeling is shot entirely with natural light. I feel sad and ancient for seeing 1,000 years in every gesture, and I get anxious. I'm living in a place where the door is mostly a big glass pane, not that you could erase a colonial gesture. I've been working on this collection of poetry titled We Left Them Nothing. The work that is inside of Speculations of the Infrared, that a lot of that, well, actually all of that text comes from We Left Them Nothing. I had started this book and writing this book before the pandemic, And I was, watching a lot of Greg Araki and really getting into this, like analyzing my teenage years and what the 90s like did to me and how it like formed me into the person that I am and identity politics and everything. But I was also thinking about like how there was this like pessimistic, nihilistic view of that time period that I really got behind. But also there was also this this like need to like find yourself and like to figure out who you are. It like consumed every single aspect of who I was during that time, and growing up as a teenager and just being like feeling like there would be some sort of like arrival. But as we've realized, like it's a continual sort of like migration toward this like destination of identity. And as I've definitely found out in the last like year or two, there are aspects of myself and even like gender energies inside of me that I felt that I've like suppressed for so long, and I'm trying to like combat and break my way out of that, but it's been difficult. So I've had a hard time finishing this poem. I feel like a lot of the topics kind of like were just really strangely like coinciding with the pandemic and the way everything was just like changing. And so it was really difficult to create and like focus on this work. But I'm gonna read portions of it. One second. These are my organs, doused in holy teradine, tanned like the sunrise, glowing like its distant relative uranium. The water is a miraculous reminder that other worlds exist beyond our own. The sunset radiates upon the surface like a trail tempting me to migrate toward the coming night. Stars shine down like aging memories blessed. American democracy is dead. A burning church becomes a part of our history as much as its creation does, as much as its extinction does, as much as its rubble turns to sand and ash and amnesia, as much as these words cut into an imagined place, and not the physical space where lives were lost and persecuted and molested, not the physical reality where blood and bruise surfaced, where bodies burned, where sacred vows were never spoken. It recedes further back into another newborn wrinkle. When trees stretch toward Venus longer than shadows against sandstone cliffs. At sunset, when the conversation revolved around Che Guevara, gay marriage, protesting Heather Wilson and W as Lila Downs played through the casita. It smells like piñon nuts on lasagna. When you had to acclimate to winter like holes in your sleeve stretched over to fit your thumbs. It smells like a futon in Nag Champa and essential oils from Co-op rubbed into the fingers. It sounds like a protest at the Roundhouse in Santa Fe or tea in the womb room. It feels like a recovered organ pumping blood inside a mountain. It witnesses the blurring of stars, the softening of scars. It erupts like the trees waving in a sea of oxygen, breathing like a choir of horns praising the sun, a stance like a horn, spiraling into the landscape, soothing a ray of sunlight before it is reunited with melanated kin. It whispers, no more apocalypse into the belly of a fire tornado twirling cursive prose against holy dirt. It sounds like weatherized windows, plastic sheets that need to be retaped, or Kathy Mendonca tapping the bass drum after 61 seconds of silence, luring Beth Ditto to extend the shape of an E as Brace pulls in right beside her. We get to be angry for 4 more centuries. We get all invented time to work through our shit. We deserve the space to safely navigate our fear, our trauma, our tears, our recovered medicines from ancient fauna, our anger and ceremonies, our rejection to any unrecognizable and unmerciful mythologies. We were powerful all along and we didn't even know it. Heart beating, nearing the concrete like a human right. Posture compromised by restless sleep keeps me from reaching maximum height. And walking around New York City during a heat wave pandemic means every other sensation, every other minute has me checking the CDC list of symptoms. The guy in the laundromat tells me he thinks they were spraying COVID in the streets. You take an appointment with the Whitney Biennial curators. You make a pact with your ancestors to never step foot in the Met unless they give the land back and stop prioritizing collections held by white colonizers. You say every institution needs to be decolonized, but you still fuck with them because you still gotta eat and buy yourself earrings and flowers and Venmo your friends. Let's get this straight. America was never safe. You don't know how violated I feel in my own country. You don't know how language has been used as sabotage against me in my own country. You don't know how silenced I have felt in my own country. You don't know how much violence I have felt in my own country. You don't know how much shame you've placed on me in my own country. I don't know how I don't You don't know how racist I have felt in my own country. You don't know how manipulated I've been in my own country. You don't know how unloved I've felt in my own country. You don't know how much hate I've encountered in my own country. You don't know how disrespectful it is to ask me how much work I've done while simultaneously killing myself from centuries of abuse in my own home. We do not wish to return to the way things were before. We do not wish to return to the same art world. Institutions will crumble, and in their place, we will create something ancient, renewed, and free from the worship of Western art. We will learn how to sustain one another and actively imagine and create communities without police brutality and apocalypse addicted fanatics. We must actively imagine and create futures that dismantle corrupt empires and their concepts and systems constructed to permit white supremacist manipulation, nuclear warfare, resource extraction, and hunger pandemics. We must actively imagine and create beauty in a world liberated from environmental abuse and genocide. We must actively imagine and create futures where humanity is no longer the central force essential for life on this earth. We must actively imagine and create futures where humanity is no longer the torture mechanism threatening all life on this earth. Don't let the notion of a nation, borders, and their associations stop you from loving untamed wilderness like the ocean. I want to know that shadow again, that shadow falling against the earth. Indigenous borders and divisive checkpoints exist as protection from the harm caused through settler colonialism and settler dominion. The health and spiritual well-being of Indigenous peoples will always be compromised as long as what motivates settler logic and negligence is driven by destructive survival mechanisms that pits their survival against others. It has become so foundational to the success of the colony and its leaders that it has also created sins and laws against the natural world itself, favoring fragile human existence over an ecosystem that has survived worse conditions for centuries before us and thrived regardless of our physical and mental well-being. The earth has its scars, and there can be no victory without trauma. That is to say, victory is nothing short of relief or recovery when the body and spirit has been depleted and the ghost shadow of ancestral habits has kept you constant and content. It's as easy as looking at the transgendered energy of a cloud or cherry blossoms shedding their petals against and into the gutter, against and into the earth. It's as easy as accepting the unknown as some kind of sacred force that doesn't need to be extracted or compartmentalized, or known as we have known conformity and worn the scars of patriarchal fear and subservience, even now as another ancestral habit beckons me to reach for the hand of another. Why am I met with my own resistance? Why have I been indoctrinated into my own suffering? Silence. Why have I neglected to care for my shadow as much as I have cared to walk into dark places where I might never be seen again? Sometimes light is the only darkness I know. We become strategic in our survival mechanics. Sharon and I sit down in a cafe in downtown Seattle as all the TV monitors blare public health PSAs to wash your hands for 20 seconds, as all the climate denial fucks extract resources from grocery stores. Shit flies off the shelves like white hetero crisis is going out of business. Resource extraction will not protect you. Wash your hands for 20 seconds if it makes you feel safe. Wear a mask for a selfie. Wash your hands while you read this. Put down your phone and clean it. Wash your hands again if it makes you feel better. Burn everything you just wore. As they hoard canned vegetables from poor communities they look down upon for so long. This is resource extraction. Or the suicidal terrorist white dude in San Francisco who finishes taking a shit and walks straight out of the toilet without washing his hands. Fucking boomers. Sharon and I joke about bathroom dominatrix public servants who punish bad public hygiene offenders. Wash your hands or be whipped. Wash your hands and submit. Into the cloud like a wrinkle, canyons collect gratitude, hanging like a curtain of uncertainty. English minimizes the scale of spiritual surrender. Language itself is a caged animal. It knows to name, but it does not know mountains. It cannot remember canyons. It forgets even as it is invoked. Its hunger is beyond addiction. Who will remember my love affair with the earth? Who will be left to write about it? Who will remember the way the clouds whirled inside my mother and uranium found its way into my budding sexuality like a serpent transformed from the clit? The way solar flares danced to the Cocteau twins? Who will remember water falling from a faucet and into the palm of my hands to purify my dick? Who will remember my love affair with water in sacred sperm, in sacred blood, in sacred measure, equal part life and death, equal part trust and fear, equal part feminine and masculine? Who will remember dirt and rock and shards of glass, the river of razors that marked this flesh? When he cut himself across his belly, did I anticipate he jumped off that bridge any more than an asteroid could anticipate slamming against the earth? Isn't that also a suicide? Isn't that also a risk? Isn't that also a life to be celebrated? Isn't that also sacred? Isn't that also sex, sperm penetrating the egg, mother absorbing father, obliterating gender momentarily? Isn't that also praying mantis? You see, isn't extinction as sacred and ancestral? Aren't these words following that same trajectory? Aren't they migrating towards some familiar end, asteroid and uranium entangled in my malignant desire? It leaves me exhausted like iTunes after playing Treasure from beginning to end and beginning to end and beginning to end, while the clouds graze the sky over Oregon and Montana and the Atlantic. What's a res fag to do when my own self-love leaves me too exhausted to give gay men an ounce of my being? And I wonder if the sex ever fulfilled me. Did it ever make me more powerful or patient? Did it ever provide me calcium or antioxidants or solidarity? Because it never removed the blackheads or the black holes, sucking and penetrating, leaving nothing behind. I want to reenact the way I fell in love with Oregon. The drive west, Exnay on the colonial Oregon Trail, bullshit Exnay on the way autocorrect assumes capitalism, Exnay on growing more jaded with age, as if you could write off the beauty of the sunset just because it happened 24 hours earlier. Every day since you were born, Exnay on presumptions of redundancy being so clinical and exhausting. Utah is beautiful, even if you only ever drive through it. Another Indian killed by a white man. Another white lady asked to touch my hair today. Another res dog, or was it coyote, asking for the scraps so he could remake the stars. You took 2 fucking steps off that wretched wooden ship and immediately lost all your innocence. Eyes on the sun, shining hills, gray overcast, black outcast memory, distorted sound machine, distorted asphalt rhythm, sunflower forgiveness, distorted memory, sunflower madness, sun, soon, assuming the sun, soon, sour, sooner than power, soon the sun, monsoon, cower, flower, distorted sunflower, soon power assumes the cower, if not the sun spreads fecund and flower. Mile marker 241, like what the fuck? Eyes on the memory, now an ancient ancestor, now an oral tradition, now a victory against hetero supremacy. Eyes on the road, motherfucker. Eyes on the memory when the sun rises, now where it sets instead of the flatness of outer space, instead of the suffocating city like a prison, land held hostage, daddy fucker, land held back, the city, suffocating sun, suffocating city, suffocating flower, suffocating city, suffocating memory, suffocating nostalgia, now becomes ritual, now becomes hydration, now becomes rainfall through wooded trees away from the shit city, now becomes no service, now becomes matrix unplugged, now becomes extractive threat, now the sun becomes clouds of sheep fat, and the highway is down to fuck. Between runaway towns and failed industries, colonized institutions and detailed gentrification, now the memory becomes blood sausage, flies swarming around bloody earth, and earth becomes child's laughter, chishy elbows and chishy love. Lights driving in the holy fuck of night might be sublime, might be drunk suspicion, might be the last song she heard. And anxious star formations, constellations submit to memorize betrayal. And the truth smears like chishy knees against distorted asphalt. Pebbles asteroid their way into your skin, and the sun rises like a black hole, exposing the sacred clit. Well, thank you. I'm going to stop there.
Hello, my name is Alán. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Demian, for that incredible reading. I wrote down like so many things as you were reading, particularly Whispers No More Apocalypse. I think I'm gonna hold that with me, not just for today, but for a while. Thank you for that offering. So my name is Alán. On the screen, you can see my body from the shoulders to the top of my hair. I wear dark, long locks on a bun on the top of my head, black framed glasses, wooden earrings painted blue, and a gray scarf. And I'm a poet. I'm from Zapotec people of what is now considered Oaxaca, Mexico, is part of Mesoamerica, which is Central America and Southern Mexico. And a lot of my work is on migration. I'll be reading some poems on that. So yeah, let me just take a breath. Okay, so this poem is titled Sick in America. Before the crossing, our family could understand the whispers of the water. We bathed our cuerpos morenos as if they were holy, as if our humanity was valuable, as if we were worth life. It is hard to remember anything before the crossing. How do I tell myself I had a childhood if at the age of 5, I am a fugitive of the law? It would be easier to remember life before the crossing if we didn't become paralyzed for the rest of our lives. The doctor tells me I have post-traumatic stress disorder. He says that it's because I am an immigrant, but that in a few years I will be American. During the crossing, we were faced with the reality of what it means to be Black and Indian in an empire that constantly measures us on production, production, and production. Our blood, a sustenance to those who deem us illegal. The water here has been cut through by wooden logs that demand we show them papers that say we are not poor, nor Indian or Black. I only crossed once. Location, San Isidro-Tijuana border. Age 5, how? By foot and car, but every story heard becomes another crossing. My body remembers every crossing becomes mine. My body has experienced every crossing in dreams. Fugitive, runaway slave, fugitive, runaway Indian, fugitive, runaway soon-to-be lynched Negro, fugitive, Assata Shakur, fugitive, Mike Brown, fugitive, Sandra Bland. Crossing, the precise location in a 5-year-old's life where they lose their humanity, health, and livelihood. The site where the child realizes their guiding spirit is weakening, the body changing, the mind confused, the flesh shivering, eyes watering, digits dancing. The site where Americans will blame the child for infecting the American dream. The site where a child is just a child visiting occupied Indian land. Quote, the Black body does not migrate, it is shipped, end quote, Javier Nyango. American, I guess I'll be forever sick. And this is an encounter with my heart. And behind me is a white background with handwritten words that say, I want the world to love us and hold us over and over again. An encounter with my heart. Elders have always told me to be specific, to identify and point to the place of ache. My right index finger always pointed to my head, eyes, and upper back. Corazón, I didn't realize that when you ached, our pain migrated to different cells of our body. I wear a ring on my index finger, bought from another Indian in Oakland, thinking it would help with precision. How naive to believe that I understood you without ever conversing with you, corazón. This medicine, disguised as a ring, has fallen off so many times that I finally found my ignorance. Corazón, thank you for being so gentle. Your tenderness in the form of headache, eye ache, and backache will no longer go unnoticed. This ring does not feel loose. I know that it fits quite well. Querido corazón, I am ready to feel you. No more need to travel to my digits and make this medicine mistaken as object fall. Today, I point to you, corazón, and proudly testify, it hurts here, it hurts here, it hurts here. Now I want to share a poem that is a recipe, and it's titled Chicatanas for Morning, a recipe, and it's for Carmela Parral Santos. Chicatanas are flying ants that we used to, like, as children, like, our job in the pueblo was to go catch them, and then we would roast them. They taste like lemons, so we would roast them and eat them. But if we didn't roast them, we would just, like, essentially squash them, put them in a molcajete. Instead of using lemon on anything or salt on anything, we just use the ants. That's what chicatanas is, and this is a recipe, and it's for Carmela Parral Santos. Give me one sec. Ingredients: the strength of 5 generations of ancestors, 2 dozen roasted chicatanas, 2 roasted garlic cloves, a love for all things Black, 2 white candles, a cup of dry black beans, 4 tree chilies, quarter of a roasted onion, 2 adobe bricks, a commitment to indigenous life everywhere, 8 roasted coastal chili peppers, water or tears, salt, no salt if using tears, Carmela Parral's photograph, and freshly picked mint. Cooking instructions: open Twitter and search Ni Una Menos, and you will encounter one of the many afterlives of colonialism in the Americas. Most recently, Carmela Parral. Reader, please search her name and print her photo. On Twitter, Mara Itaji tweets the news. Asesinaron ayer a mi amiga Carmela Parral, presidenta de Estancia Grande, municipio afro-mexicano. In the afterlife of colonialism, one woman must announce the murder of another. Reader, please place the chicatanas, garlic cloves, tree chilies, coastal chili peppers, and slice of onion in a molcajete and grind them together. Feel free to add a pinch of water and salt or tea. In this cooking process, you must remember the strength and power of Black and Indigenous life. You must commit to liberation if you want this recipe to work. Reader, please channel the strength of your ancestors as you grind. Now, take a step away from the molcajete to open your own Twitter and tweet her name, Carmela Parral, Carmela Parral. Tweet until there are no more characters left in the word count. Carmela Parral, Carmela Parral. Reader, please return to grinding and add water until you have reached the ideal consistency of your first salsa de chicatanas. Let the salsa cool in the fridge. While the salsa sits in its aromas, pick up the adobe bricks, place one on its long side and the second flat against the edge of the other. Stand Carmela's photo on top of the flat adobe brick and let it rest against the other brick. Arrange the white candles on opposite ends of the bricks, and as you light them, say her name, Carmela Parral, Carmela Parral. Gather the black beans and offer them to Carmela's village by placing them around the adobe bricks. Search for a small teacup and fill it with water. Offer the water to all the trees the Mexican government is willing to cut to construct the Maya train, which Carmela opposed the reason she was murdered. Approach the fridge, scoop a few tablespoons of the salsa you just made onto a small plate, and offer the salsa to all the murdered women, girls in 3rd, 4th, and 5th genders whose names we do not know. Finally, reach for the mint. Bring the tender plant to your nose. Inhale and commit to continue experimenting with life. Commit to care. Please place mint anywhere on the adobe bricks. Dear reader, Take this recipe and offer it to others. Encourage them to experiment with life always. And I think I will just read one more because I want to just talk for at least a few brief seconds. And I literally have this on my phone because the latest edition is in a text message. Well, the English edition, because I first wrote it in Spanish. And this is for my dear friend, Jennifer Tamayo, and it's titled Future Story. One day, borders will be a word that we study, a word so fascinating that future generations will try to understand, and thankfully, there will be no grammar for comprehension. Nothing will be forgotten, but borders will be unimaginable because in the future, the lack of care and commitment to each other that was required to oppress will be something no one else has experienced. In the future, we will bring our memories. There will be many creation stories to how we got to where we are. The creation stories will be hard to tell. We will sob from the pain of betrayal, missing and disappeared relatives, endangered species, extinct languages, and the disaster of bearing witness to it all. We will also shake with joy when we describe what it felt like when settlers realized they were the demise of relationality, when settlers begged Indigenous peoples to protect the land, and when Indigenous peoples made them sign papers, the same ones they've been so obsessed with, stating that they gave up their citizenship to the country, their laws, and all the land that they accumulated and mistreated. We will release tension when nations end and the storytellers get to the part where elders and toddlers made offerings so grand to the ocean, volcanoes, mountains, and dried waterscapes that words they had never heard started coming to them in dreams. At first, they were terrified. But when they listened closer, they realized they were whispers and songs. Quiet, quiet tunes with instructions of how to offer and accept care, the care that the whispers and songs were denied but once experienced. None of the stories will be easy to witness or tell. Our bodies will only bear to tell and listen to them once. But still, we will insist on the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Demian and Alán, and thank you again to Abby and to Elizabeth Hawley and Christopher Green, curators of these two exhibitions that we're also welcoming, celebrating tonight. I'm just for a moment to say that we did ask if the readers would do a Q&A, and so if people have any thoughts or comments, you can go ahead and put them in the chat or unmute yourselves if you want to say anything to follow up those extremely moving readings. So thank you both so much, and I'll mute myself and let you take it from here. Please go ahead and speak out, give your props and shouts and questions that you might have.
Demian, I don't know if I have a question, but I want to dialogue with you about something. When you started talking, you talked about how you used to think that there was like an arrival, and how right now you're at a place where you're understanding that there's not necessarily an arrival, but this constant like migration and transformation. And I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just come up through like various conversations I've had this year. But a lot of it was even preceded, you know, the societal shift that we had to take a year ago. And now after going through all of this, right? Like I can't imagine having not gone through it. Like it feels necessary. I mean, not the death and not the way that everything was like mismanaged and not handled or uncared for or denied and any of that. Like, but I do feel like a, a weird sort of like gratitude for um not necessarily having the time to pause, but like to, well, yeah, actually having the time to pause. Like I was in this really fucked up like um art world environment where I was just like traveling and moving and like not having any time to like listen to myself or figure out like what I was going through or how, you know, certain things were like impacting me. And how, you know, you sometimes feel like you're just like obliged to like sign on to something and you're not necessarily like down with it, but you got to survive and you got to like pay the bills. And so anyway, I just feel like uh I've spent the last year like trying to like reconnect to myself and ask myself like what it means to be um alive during this time, what it means to like be witnessing like different aspects of like the world changing and like people changing beside it. um you know, some of it came out of that Embrace of the Serpent film I watched a few years ago. I was thinking just about like the cosmological relationship that Indigenous Black and Brown communities like have with the world and with like sacred cosmology. Um, Thinking about like binaries and uh, what it what it means to like exist inside of a universe that doesn't have limitations, but how humans like create these like boundaries, how humans create these boxes, um, and how much I want to break out of them, but also how much I like love my little box at the same time. Like I like on the one hand, like I'm sick of like having to always talk about like Indigenous issues or queer issues or non-binary gender issues and such. But I also realize that a lot of like my community and a lot of what we're what our goals are for envisioning like the future like come through creating those spaces for one another. It and so yeah, I feel like I went through this like really weird point like a few years ago where I was like, oh my God, I'm like getting older and I don't know how long I'm gonna live for. And it's just like my midlife crisis or whatever. But then I didn't want, I think I just want to like reconnect with what it means to like to be alive, um, to be thankful for being alive, to embracing these things that like I had hangups about, like even prayer, because I associated it so much with like praying to like Jesus or Catholicism and like forced assimilation into Western religion and such. But I just feel like at this point, like I'm still like learning a lot about myself, and I'm still learning a lot um about like reconnecting like with my ancestors. And even if that ancestor is like the earth, you know, like what that means, like rebuilding a relationship with like the place that you inhabit and the place around you. um and I've, you know, when I wrote that book, An Infected Sunset, I was thinking about like this sort of like stereotype of like the Indian who like talks to nature, who talks to trees and shit. um and I've always wanted to sort of like think about like, well, if I could talk to any element, like why can't I talk to like things that are being extracted? Why can't I talk to like these things that are being like violated on like on a continual basis? Um, because they all have like their own sacred energy that is being disrupted. But it's all a part of like the same sort of like universal force. And I realized that, and I think maybe it's also just like also trying to reconnect with creation stories, that I also began to realize that there also is like this like sort of like romanticization that I have like with creation stories, like looking back and like trying to like re-earth like whatever part of like my indigenous identity or ancestors or traditions were like severed through colonialism, without realizing that we are actively today like writing creation stories, like what is going on right now and what we are experiencing right now, you know, will be like people 200 years if we live that long, if we're like if we are privileged enough to live that long, like 200 years, 300 years from now, like they'll look back and like see what the fuck we did, how we reacted, like how we stood up, how we saw beauty and so much horror. How do you feel about that though? Like where are you at with it?
Yeah, I think that your response reminded me of like other moments in your reading, like right before you got to the part where you are talking about the pandemic, you talk about the ancestral habit of like reaching back to you. And then you, when I just asked you that question, you kind of mentioned like always kind of asking like, I don't know if you said, what am I doing in life, or something about like, or what is happening. And I feel like that's also something that once like first contact happened with European settlers, that's like a question that like, you know, people have had to ask themselves over and over again. And that's kind of like what fragments our imagination. And I think that sometimes for me personally, what has fragmented my ability to speculate in my creative work. And I think that right now I'm like able to speculate a little bit more, and partly it's because of people like you, the work that you put out, your constant push to imagine outside of what we have inherited by being born in the midst of like empire accumulation. And when you were talking about speaking to the elements in reference to like an infected sunset, it also reminds me of the moment in your reading when you talk about caring for the shadow. And when you said that, it like really threw me aback because I think a lot about shadows. I have a shadow archive. I have hundreds of photographs of my shadow. My book is also like photographs of my shadow, the cover.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that like, sometimes people like, I think, I mean, having grown up undocumented in the US, it was this idea that I had to hide in the shadows, which then like, it was a narrative that like the settler state gave me, right? Like the shadow narrative, the illegal narrative. And it was really hard for me to like realize that that narrative wasn't my arrival. That yes, I was moving in the shadows and I continue to move in the shadows because of like race or because of my indigeneity or my gender. But I think like you, I also want to care for the shadow. And I feel like for me, that's a commitment that is lifelong that I want to practice and insist on. So thank you for that, because I wouldn't have articulated it unless you mentioned it in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I've also like through this last year, I'm kind of getting fed up with like academia and theory and all like, and so I'm trying to think of like ways, like how do you simplify something? How do you take something back to your tribe? Like how do you I think it's just that like caring for your shadow, caring for like the universe and like elements and reconnecting, like that is like, I mean it sounds like it should be the most simplest, the most simple thing to do, and I don't think that simple things are easy to do at all. Like there is a shit ton of like again arrival in order for something to be like simplified. There's a lot of like movement and like intention that like drives that, and asking and protocol that goes into that as well. But yeah, I'm also just trying to figure out a different way to like to communicate like through language or through poetry and like through the spoken word and publication. I just want to push that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I think that the way that you do it, because a lot of your work is text, because your visual work is text, a lot of your visual work is text-based, I feel like it's already betraying language in a way that is really useful. Like, for example, in my community, like in my family, like not all of us are literate. Like my grandmother can't read or write, right? And I think that text-based visual work, like the ones that you produce for those who are able to see but can't read, they'll still get affective feelings out of the work, right? Like I can maybe show my grandmother some of your work and she won't be able to read it. But that won't be the barrier because you've invested in other forms of reading and other forms of like building relationships. And when you talk about the things that should be easy, like they're hard, like yeah, shit is super hard because relationships like take time. I remember last time I was home in Oaxaca, I wanted my grandma to like, I was like, oh, can I take coffee from her garden? And she freaking made me pick the coffee, grind all the coffee beans, and then grind cinnamon. She made me literally cut cinnamon and grind it on my own. That took me days. And I was like, okay, I'm never again gonna ask for coffee. Because like I just thought she'd be like, yeah, take the beans, but and I can just like grind them in my little grinder over here. But she made me hand grind them all. And when you're talking about like connecting to things that should be easy, it's like picking the coffee and bagging it and bringing it back shouldn't have been hard. But she was like, if you're gonna consume it, you better know how to treat it.
Yeah, no, that's it. How has your family been doing through all this? I mean, I don't want to turn it into like a completely personal conversation, but like I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that back in Oaxaca, they've been okay. It's pretty rural, so like no one has been impacted by the virus. Um, there's only one bridge that connects where we're from to like the rest of the country. And when the pandemic started, they had like men, which means like 17-year-old people, like 17-year-old men like guarding the bridge and taking turns like every couple of hours to make sure that no foreigners or like visitors got into the village. So they've been fine. And then here in the States, it's just been like wild, you know. I think everybody but some of my aunts that are here, all of them have gotten COVID, except yeah, all of them. So it's weird to just be here, like everybody, which is weird, right? The narrative changes. Everybody at home is okay, and it's like the least care they have been, and then here it's like everybody has been like in this frenzy, and also like all of them being undocumented. It's just been like, okay, well, what happens when one is undocumented in a pandemic, and even like exploitative labor like is no longer an option. Yeah, it's kind of sucked in that way. But I have papers now, so that has helped us tremendously as far as like accessing resources.
That's awesome. Oh my God.
And same question to you before we end, like how are you and how is your community?
Yeah, a few of my relatives have gotten COVID and passed away. Some, recovered and everything. But it's hard. They live either on the reservation or in like border towns to the res. One thing that I think has been really nice is the access that a lot of Indigenous communities have had to being vaccinated. So there's like a push for that, but it's hard. It's weird. I don't know how I feel about it. I just miss going I just miss going back. Like so much of my practice is also about like driving and traveling and like moving in the car, that it's really difficult just to not be able to be around my family right now. But thankfully everyone has been fine. Medicine people that we are in like community with as well have been like taken care of, which was like a huge sort of worry that we had at first, because just, you know, there's a lot of them are elders, a lot of them are getting older, and we were just really worried that that knowledge, you know, was going to be compromised. But, you know, thankfully that hasn't been the case.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm happy that they're okay. I'm sorry to hear about your family members who have passed. I feel like this has really, this time has taught me a lot about grieving, and the many ways in which that takes, especially when one is alone. So yeah, I hope that if grieving is something that you are welcoming, that process is happening in a way that makes things better or feel safer for you.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful to share space, though. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Oh yeah, of course. It was wonderful to share space. And does anyone have any last questions or comments?
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you to you both. That was really, really gorgeous. And listening to you just share your work, but also your relationship just now, and the extension of your work through your love for community and one another. And so I'm just really appreciative. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll add my thanks as we round out the evening. This has been such an honor to hear both of your work, and really just want to extend that gratitude and joy as well to be able to kind of hear your words, both of you. And then thank you to EFA, of course, and to Chris and to Betsy for creating the spaces for us to then get to gather around. And I encourage everyone here to, if you have not yet, visit both exhibitions and kind of take in all the visuals of the works of incredible Indigenous artists. And you can find those both, of course, on our websites. Something that we've been doing with our events is, welcoming and inviting people to unmute and say thank you and kind of fill the space with everyone's voices who are on the call. So I'll invite everyone to unmute and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Demian. Thank you, Alán.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. My pillow was falling.
I miss you all.
Miss you too.
Well, stay safe out there. Sending you warmth and protection and good health.
Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise.